Good morning. Thank you for being here, and thanks for the London Center for having me, and good luck in this two-day conference and in a continuous work. My talk is actually a perfect continuation of Lynn's. I'll be speaking about a case study, a specific case, that of Shafiq Adas, as a case study of anti-Semitism in Iraq. And I'll try to draw some conclusions, local and even global. So this is Shafiq Adas. This is the man. This is a picture I received from his son, Sabah, who I think is this man, this boy here. This picture was taken around 1940, and today he's about 83 years old, I think. First of all, about the man, Shafiq Adas. Shafiq Adas was a very wealthy Jewish merchant or importer living in Basra in Iraq. Perhaps one of the, perhaps the wealthiest Jew in Iraq, we don't know exactly. And he was hanged in a public execution outside his house in Basra, in the southern city of Basra near the Persian Gulf, in September 1948, after a 3-day trial accusing him of being a traitor because he was accused of selling arms to Israel. Israel by then was already a declared country, an independent country. And the verdict was, of course, guilty. It was a kangaroo trial. Everybody knew that he was innocent. He didn't have the option to bring defense witnesses. It was a very quick and very hostile environment in Basra, and the man was executed. So a few words, first of all, about the context of the entire story, and this again continues a little bit what Lynn was talking about. As you can see here in the picture, this is typical of a Iraqi Jewish environment, of a certain Iraqi Jewish environment in the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. But if you want to understand this assimilation process, you have to go a little bit back. For more than 1,000 years, Jews were considered to be dhimmi, which means they were, on the one hand, protected, but discriminated against group. At the middle of the 19th century, there are internal reforms in the Ottoman Empire, which are called the Tanzimat reforms, and for the first time, Jews are being equal, according to the law, with Muslim citizens. So this is the first time. Until then, they were not equal. And in the middle of the 19th century, in a very similar or somewhat similar process to what happened in Europe due to the emancipation and the French Revolution, Jews become equal. Jews are trying to enjoy as much as they can. Again, in a very similar way to what happened in Europe, they become doctors, lawyers. Baghdad, as Lynn just mentioned, was more than third Jewish, and the Jewish presence in certain occupation was very much felt. The British occupation even makes it more pronounced, and the independence of Iraq in 1932 see Jews in certain fields very dominant. What we can see here is Sasson Yechezkel, the man in the middle, who was the first finance minister of Iraq. So the case itself is, to me at least, reminds me of the case of Dreyfus. This is Shafiq Adas in a somewhat less pleasant circumstances. So he was arrested. There was a kangaroo trial. He could bring no defense witnesses, and the entire environment in Iraq in those days was very anti-Jewish. There were demonstrations in the streets. Actually, the entire Iraqi establishment was doing what the street wanted. So, for example, Mr. Adas was a friend of the regent. He was a friend of the entire Iraqi higher echelons, ministers, merchants, other people, and he wanted to have a pardon from the regent, and the regent couldn't say yes because he was more afraid of public reaction. And despite all attempts to save the life of Shafiq Adas, he was hanged outside his house on 23rd of September in Basra. Now, if you go even a little bit further outside of the Iraqi context and go to a very Jewish trajectory, you can see that what we have here is the Dreyfus famous picture. You can see the same trajectory. You can see the first stage is a long period of historic discrimination. In Europe, it's under the church. In Islamic world, it's under the Ottoman or the Sultan and before. Then you have a period of legal emancipation. Even if not perfect, at least by the book, it's the first time the Jews become equal. Then you have a process of assimilation. Jews enjoy everything. And then, and this is the very important point, there's a backlash. And the backlash says, no, we're sorry. You're not exactly part of us. That's true in Germany. That's true in Austro-Hungary, in the empire. And that's true in Iraq. So there's a process of Jews going more and more into the Iraqi society. Some Jews, and Shafiq Adas is a perfect example of that group, who are trying to be more Iraqi than Iraqi. They're the most patriotic Iraqis. If you look at some of the best authors and journalists and writers in Iraq in the first half of the 20th century, they are Jews. They speak excellent Arabic, they write excellent Arabic. Their only problem is that they're Jews. And that's, the more Jews are assimilating into the Iraqi society, and this is a little bit perhaps what Albert Memmi meant and some other people called the Arab Jews. They tried to be Iraqi, but then there's a backlash, and I think I view the case of Shafiq Adas as perhaps the climax of telling the Jews, we're sorry, but your place is not here. Now, when you look at Iraqi memoirs, Jewish Iraqi writers, or any other book by an Iraqi Jew of this period, they always mention the Shafiq Adas case as one of the reasons who caused the exodus in 1950, 1951. Of course, everybody knows about the Farhud in 1950. I mean, not everybody, but at least Iraqi Jews know about the Farhud in 1941, and it's always been spoken of. But the case of Shafiq Adas, the public hanging of Shafiq Adas, was really a shock to the entire community, because they told themselves, well, if someone as powerful, as connected, as rich, as Shafiq Adas can be hanged just like this in a 3-day process, then we're not safe here anymore. Now, a very important point to mention is that he wasn't very Jewish. He didn't go to synagogue. He was entirely not a Zionist, so you couldn't blame him for being part of the Jewish community. He didn't look Jewish, or whatever looking Jewish means. And he wasn't active in politics at all. He certainly wasn't a Zionist. So it's a classic case of a scapegoat, an anti-Semitic scapegoat, which is very reminding of what happened in Europe. So if I have just one or two last moments to speak of, it's a very good reminder, as Lynn said, that Israel is a very diverse in terms of culture. More than half of the population of Israel is certainly indigenous, not European, white, colonialist, Ashkenazim, or whatever. I don't think that Jews who came to Israel from Europe, including my family, are colonialist or imperialist, but you can't talk of someone who was kicked out of Baghdad or was hanged, executed in Basra, and therefore an entire Jewish community leaves Iraq. You can't really speak about being colonialist or imperialist. Another very important point, and this is another point of this conference, is that, as we all know today, anti-Semitism, one of its presentations is anti-Zionism, saying that Jews don't have the state of their own. And the main point is that, well, before Zionism, everything was perfect. There was a harmony between Jews, Christians, Muslims. Everything was good here in the Ottoman Empire. Well, not exactly everything was good. And if you look into the details and see how Jews lived, and even when they tried to assimilate and stop being Jews, or at least stop looking as Jews, then it didn't really work. So in other words, Zionism is not the problem, but the remedy. And the entire model of a binational, supranational, one state, whatever you can call it, which was the main point of anti-Zionist propaganda or ideology from the 40s and the 50s, I think is being disproved and we already have a precedent. It didn't end well. And we don't really want to go back there. So with that, I conclude my remarks, and I want to thank you.